Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all today to this event that is the Collider on virtual assets. My name is Youssouf Traoré. I am the entrepreneur in residence for the Impact Accelerator. I'm honored to be your guest tonight. I will be the master of ceremony. This event is packed with the insightful conversation, and our guests are the highest level. It will be divided in two parts. First, the presentation on giving the venture perspective, and then we'll have a panel of guests that will, with them, we will be able to have questions and answer after all. To help me in this, let me introduce you to someone very special here, Professor Ikhlaq Sadou, that is the Dean of the IE School of Technology. He has a resume that is really long. If we don't have time to tell everything about that, and he will be here with us today. He will moderate the panel with our guest. Please join me to welcome Ikhlaq Sadou on the stage.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, audio okay? You can all hear me, right? All right, great. So first of all, thank you for coming. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to open this event, to have you all here. What we're doing today is really a big deal, okay? And I wanna explain it to you. Can I get the slides that correlate with my talk, ideally? You can put somebody else's slides, but it's better if it's actually mine. All right, so as just building on Youssouf's introduction, this is future virtual assets, basically virtual asset regulation. We're gonna talk about this, but that little item down there, this is more than a discussion. That's kind of what I wanna bring up to start with. You've been to panel sessions before, that's always interesting to have panel sessions, but this is more than that. And I want to explain why this is more than that. And it's also the kickoff of our, virtual IE Ripple Virtual Asset Regulation Lab, and that's a big deal. But it's more than that too. Okay, so we got the kickoff of the lab. We have a panel session with great experts. There's a lot going on in this area. Okay, but why I am really even more excited about why we're all here today is that this is, to me, like the trial of kind of a new research model. It's like a new way to engage faculty and industry and ventures and how they come together, how they can work together. We're trying that now, all right? So I'm going to start with just layers here. For people who are thinking about a new venture, for people who are just looking at the opportunities in this space, it's an ecosystem. All the people here, they're great people to know. You can, just connecting with them. They could be future influencers. They could be mentors in different ways. So, baseline, it's great that we have everyone, of this category here. But for researchers, this is actually a way that you can hear what is already being done, what's working in different categories, what's working in ventures, what's working from a regulator's point of view, what's working from larger companies' point of view. And before you kind of guess blue sky, oh, that would be a great research problem, that would be something interesting to do, before you do that, you can get this landscape. And now when you make these research proposals, they can be, I think, more applied. So I think of it as like blue sky, but constrained so that you don't run into a tree on the way to blue sky. So I think it's like the new blue sky. I don't really think that term is gonna stick, but just for now, let me use it to explain, partly what's going on here. So here, hold on. I'm in control of this part. So to get started, who's actually here? There's everyone in this room, and we'll just run through this a little bit, but there's also 20 5 more people, maybe more, I don't know, that are online in different ways. We have 2 different channels. So there's people online, and they're everywhere from California and parts of Europe and Middle East and just wherever the waking time zones are right now. So there's this group and there's everyone. And in terms of who's here, I just want to appreciate, we have all those that are in the global student category. So thank you guys who are here and online who are coming. We have a group of people from RISE Europe. RISE is the set of universities. There's 14, I think, of them. And together, the entrepreneurial activity that comes out of these 14 universities is 10% of all the ventures that are funded across Europe. It's a top group of universities, everyone from Oxford and ETH and KTH, I won't just list everybody, but, they're here. And then there's a group called a Tech Catalyst, the global faculty, and there's universities and faculty. I call them like a friendly set of entrepreneurial faculty all over the world, and they're here as part of this community. And there's, of course, everyone in the School of Science and Technology, i.e. School of Science and Technology. I want to appreciate all the effort and work that they did to bring everyone here today for this. And we have committee leads, Rafif, Guillermo, there you are. Carlos is online today. Geoffroy, here you are. Isabel is back there managing all the global people as executive director for the Impact Accelerator. And our smart expert people who are here today. Andrew from Ripple, where are you? There you are. Deepa is online. She's from VARA, Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority in Dubai, UAE, Dubai. Jillian Grennan, who is a professor at UC Berkeley. You'll see her, and she's really in this asset regulation or the regulation space. Javier Tamashiro, where are you? There you are. Okay. One of the 2 entrepreneurial viewpoints that we're going to have, we're also going to have Michael Fascinello, he's online, and you'll see him virtually on stage a little bit later, and Professor Luis Maldonado, there you are, and he's really inner circle in our virtual asset lab, okay? So this is who's here. I'm only trying to tell you kind of like who we're talking to right now. And I just want to say a few words. I was in Toronto at Ripple's event. I know it's like a week and a half ago, not maybe 2. I have a time problem here. Can't remember breakfast yesterday. So actually, I can remember breakfast because it seems to be always the same thing. That's a different story. Okay, but I can't remember exactly when I was in Toronto, but it was about 2 weeks ago. And I got a chance to show a couple of these same slides, and I want to, always a risk to just jump into content and, go right there. But let me frame this discussion a little bit with those slides, and then we're going to have everyone introduced and locked into this conversation. So virtual asset, regulation, kind of what is it? So there's kind of a list of things here. And at the top, it says basically like, okay, if you're regulating, can you at least say what a virtual asset is, right? Like, is this coin, is that paper, is that that currency, whatever, is it a virtual asset? So that's at the top of the list. The second thing is basically registration. Is somebody allowed to buy it, or is somebody allowed to sell it? So you're a professional, like financial agency. Are you allowed to sell this thing? Are you allowed to do it? That's the second one. When I think about, those things at the very top of the list, I think of them as kind of very traditional in one sense, because they're very close to finance. Like, even if it wasn't virtual, the government would still have the same question. Like, is it a thing you can sell, and are you allowed to sell it for protection of people? So there's that. As you go down the list, it goes kind of farther away from traditional finance, and it goes into things that are almost not finance and kind of more complex. So number 3 is well, all right, do we know who the customer is? We want to enable investors, but we don't want money laundering. We don't want like misuse, right? So you get one level down. You go a little bit further down and you get to, well, making sure that you're not having market manipulation, there's not conflict of interest, you don't have cybersecurity issues, people stealing things out of the system. And so you go a little further down, and that's where technology tends to have a stronger role. Like maybe you can detect things that are happening that are kind of incorrect. You go further down and you get to ensuring liquidity. That means, well, if everything is like, if nothing is actually tied to like a physical asset or to something that has inherent value, then there's a lot of just like everybody wants it, and now nobody wants it. And, in those situations, like, how do you actually make sure that when you want to sell it, there is someone to sell it to? So you're getting to ensuring liquidity. Is that a technical problem? Not really. Is that just a finance regulation problem? Not really. So you're getting down into kind of like weirder, tougher, questions. And then you get to cross-border. And cross-border goes all the way into geopolitical. So, like other countries, how do they look at it, the boundaries of these things? That's not a technical problem. It could be a technical problem, but it's not by itself, all right? So there's a spectrum of things here. One question that just comes up is, and I'll just give you this one example, ChatGPT will probably never comply with the regulation that we already, GDPR, that we have in Europe. And why? Because that regulation was written before ChatGPT was introduced. So when they wrote it specifically for the technology that existed. As soon as the new technology comes along, well, no one could have guessed that, it doesn't work that way. It just can't. And so, this brings us to the open question, how specific can you be in asset regulation? Like, should you be writing, you cannot use Bitcoin to transfer money out of the country without declaring it? Or should you just be saying, you can't transfer an asset? Like, can you be kind of more vague about the technology because the technology changes so quickly, right? I'll let all the panelists discuss and tell me why that's completely wrong. I got no problem with that, but I'm introducing some questions, basically. All right, another thing on the cross-border topic, and thank you, Louis, for the slide here, credit here, but he made the point that, everyone as countries has kind of a different perspective on what they, how strongly they're in favor or not in favor of allowing these things to happen. So some countries are like, well, we have very particular things that say you can do it. Other countries are saying you just purely cannot do it, cannot use it. And you got some in the middle that say, well, if the old laws apply, then you can do it, and we'll just see what happens over time. So I just introduced cross-border issues a little bit. The fact is you got countries that have different perspectives, like, yes, you can, no, you can't, but the technology goes all the way through every country, So the technology is global, and, if you got a person from country A in that red box in country B, or even a resident in country B, and they break the law in country A, what do you do about that? Maybe there's a technical solution, but most likely there's only a slow, complex political back channel. This is where we kind of get stuck with regulation. So, it's like all you can really do is control your own laws, you can control your own citizens, your own land, and your cooperation. Like, how much do you cooperate with others? Is there a technical solution? Maybe, I don't know. Okay. I'm going to keep going. So this is bringing up a set of new questions. These are some of the things that we'll end up talking about. How does this work with non-financial use cases? Is identity central here? What are you going to do with central bank digital currencies? Cross-border regulation, what do you do? Can you even regulate DeFi? Does AI have a role here? But the kind of bigger picture way that I'm thinking about this is someone is writing this policy. Someone writes a policy, and they write it for the good of all the people. And then you've got the ventures, and the ventures have many times part of the solution. Like the ventures can do it differently, but they're making technology, and that technology can be part of the solution. So how do we kind of make use of what ventures have already done as part of, kind of like sometimes even to help the policy? I don't know the answer, but I'm at least setting up that frame. So today, the goal is to discuss, would the solutions be different or faster if we had, the firms, the ventures, the researchers, what if they could actually work together, or at least work on the intersections between what they can actually do? So you may have seen a slide like this before. This is the whole goal of our Impact Accelerator, to bring these communities together. That little explosion in the middle between the green and the blue, that's where you are right now. That colliding, you're about to do that. And what we're going to do is we're having this event right now. That, by the way, that picture there is what particles actually look like when they collide in a collider, that thing. So we're about to collide with these ideas, and from that, we want to discover what's the actual problem. There's a problem you think is a problem, but when you see what other people are already doing, that may not be the challenge. So we want to know what's the actual problem, what's the gaps, and from that, we're going to be taking research proposals. And so if you can say, I learned from that conversation that this is actually a problem and it's complementary with something else, we are going to be able to deploy the funds that are basically coming from Ripple, but together as part of the Virtual Asset Lab, deploy it to research. But we want it to be more applied, more targeted, more properly oriented to blue sky. What I mean by that is we don't want to tell researchers what to do, but we want to tell you the space where the creativity would have the maximum value. So that's what we're doing today, now, okay? So this is the introduction. We're going to have everyone give their perspective right now. We're about to do that, but I'm just going to end with, this is more than a panel session. This is really the launch of like a new model of how we want to do research, okay? So with that, no, I'm not supposed to do this part. With that, I'm supposed to hand it back to the moderator. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Iklak.
Yeah.
The next person that we'll have on stage is Andrew from Ripple. And let's a round of applause for Andrew.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much, and thank you, Iklak, for your intro. So I work at Ripple. I'm Ripple's policy director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Mainly, I'm here to say how very excited we are about this partnership, and this event itself. This for a variety of reasons. UBRI, so the University Blockchain Research Initiative, which Ripple set up to fund and support research in the blockchain space, has worked with Iklak for a long time. It's been a very profitable and collaborative collaboration, which we have, like so much, we want to bring it over here from California to Europe, to IE. Much like Ripple as a company has also moved from California to Europe, and we're very excited about the regulatory environment here. So there are lots of overlaps going on. Regulation's my job, so don't get rid of it. But I think we're excited for a couple of reasons. One, because IE is obviously such a preeminent business school and university in the region. We like its collaborative approach. We like how it's trying to do education in a new way, or in a more modern way that works for industry across sectors. And obviously the Impact Accelerator is a huge part of that, or a big step forward. This, as far as I know, is quite a new model for how to do collaboration, how to bring together academics, public sector, private sector, to work on concrete problems. We obviously want to see solutions to that. That's why we support ventures like this. We want it for our own sake, so that we can use these products and services when they come out. We also think it's good for the ecosystem to develop skills, develop understanding across sectors, people, and geographies. I think it would be, obviously, Iklak's already gone through all the different people in the room and listening on online. That in itself is great. I want to call out particularly Vara as well, which is, you probably know, I think it's still correct to say that it's the first dedicated virtual asset regulator globally. This is a very interesting approach that Dubai has taken to regulate virtual assets. Ripple is active in Dubai, in the UAE. We think Vara is doing a great job in building it up, and we collaborate with them quite a lot directly. So the fact that we have this Middle East, American through Ripple, European combination of private, public, and academic sectors bodes very well for this project. So very briefly, I'm going to just add a bit of a gloss on some of the issues that ICLAC raised. My own personal background is in financial regulation. I worked at the Bank of England. I did a PhD in the political economy of financial regulation, so really looking at these questions of why do we get the rules we get and what's their effect? Why does that happen? So I think starting where you started, most of virtual asset regulation so far has really been considered in the context of financial regulation. And that's for very good reasons. For a long time, these looked like investments, or often these are investments. People were treating them like financial assets, financial investments. And regulators, not to get too institutionalist, but most regulators in this space are financial regulators. They have a certain way of looking at the world. And so, lo and behold, they found crypto assets and thought they looked like things they're comfortable with. Now, this is important. It's obviously a necessary first step for what's been going on. But I would consider this sort of the regulation of virtual assets, how to find a virtual asset, and how has the public sector been able to understand them and grab them in a way that can make them come within their control in a way that they find themselves comfortable with and they think will achieve their own public objectives. What I hope we can move on from or onto in this conversation, and then as part of the wider project, as the actual collider and accelerator, is talking about regulation for virtual assets and regulation for blockchain. So not of it, but for it. So this, I think, slightly gets into your point around these wider issues that are perhaps a bit more nebulous, a bit harder to pin down. We can talk about it much more in depth in the panel session. I think for me, there's a couple of obvious areas where we're talking about now using blockchain as a tool for regulation or as a tool for wider policy objectives. And I think some of the obvious examples here are around CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies, where central banks are using blockchain or potentially using blockchain or using the ideas that have come from this sector to work out how they can better provide monetary stability or monetary supply for their own reasons. And I think also a very interesting area, which is coming much more from the private sector, is around sustainability policy. So how can we use blockchain for carbon credits, for example, and tracing that throughout, which solves a real world problem in terms of double counting and lack of transparency that has plagued the sector for a while. So I think these are two quite obvious answers or areas of seeing blockchain used as a tool now for wider policy objectives. And the question is, how can you enable that? What does the regulatory environment look like for that? Because that's very different to the regulatory environment of saying these crypto assets are an investment and protectors need to be protected as if it was a traditional financial investment, which is perfectly legitimate for what problem that's trying to solve, but is a different way of thinking about and using this technology. So the way I look at these things is I think regulation has kind of two ultimate purposes. It's either protective or it's enabling. And traditional financial regulation is very much on the protective side. Obviously, consumer protection is an obvious part of this. Financial stability, also around ethics and fraud and things. This is wider than just finance, but this seems to me the sort of what we tend to think of regulation for. But there's also the enabling side. So regulation that creates a stable environment, a certain future for a given technology and set of actors and business models, so that industry and ventures and businesses can grow. Because if you're unsure how your sector is going to be treated by regulation, by law, it's impossible to invest in it. It's impossible to know what's going to happen. You might have to pivot in a way that you don't want to, or you find your business model constrained by certain rules that, to your point, were created before your technology came along, and so can't have addressed them. So I think one good example of this enabling regulation is, which might be odd to say, but is the European PSD2, so Payment Service Directive 2. Now this, 5 years ago, I think it was, I can't quite remember, had many ambitions behind it. One of which was to create open banking, to make it easier to switch bank accounts. Now, that's never happened. Nobody switches their bank account. But what it has done is it's created this whole class of fintech companies in Europe and payment service providers in Europe who have had access to banking data and then been able to develop new business models. So we've seen an industry grow out of the certainty and the protections created for them in regulation that we wouldn't necessarily have seen beforehand. And I think the fact that we haven't seen the same development in the United States, despite all its financial and technological size, but where it doesn't have a similar set of laws. I think this is quite a telling comparison. Now, going to some of the topics we'll be talking about later, I think in AI we might be seeing something similar around here, potentially around digital ID as well. These are some of the areas that I think this kind of idea of having a enabling legislative or regulatory framework can be quite useful. All I'd flag is, I don't know how much you guys follow EU politics, but so Belgium will have the rotating European Council presidency the first half of next year, and their Minister for Digitalization is very keen to try and use blockchain for societal good, and he wants to create a lot of political impetus behind this to start finding ways that both the European level and member states can use blockchain technology for their own citizens, so that people actually start using it, understanding it, getting comfortable with it. And I think that will really change the way regulation of the technology happens, because as soon as people are familiar and see the benefits of using it in their daily lives, it suddenly won't be this abstract thing you have to create rules for, you have to port rules across from traditional sectors or think them out of blue skies, totally blue skies. You think, actually, it's something you work with, you see where the problems are, you see what the solutions can be. So, I mean, just on top of that, I think there are two dimensions to keep in mind, which Iklak touched on. I think it's helpful to separate them out. One is geographic scope. This is a global technology, it's an obvious thing to say. Regulation is not global. It, frankly, will never be global. That's probably fine. But what that doesn't mean is there needs to be a huge amount of coordination, alignment between regulators, between industry globally. I personally don't think that regulatory arbitrage helps anyone at any time. What, for me, the ideal would be is a series of principles or desired outcomes or ambitions across the world that firms know how to comply with, that they know what compliance looks like in that given country. And for that, we need the international organizations, we need bilateral ties, we need a very strong and trusting partnership between private and public sectors globally. The other thing I want to raise, and maybe slightly collide with you here, is on the institutional scope of regulation. So what's our level of analysis here? Are we talking about firms? Are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about people? Are we talking about the technology itself or the activities based on it? Now, in traditional financial services, regulation attaches to the institution, to the firm, the company. That has been ported across largely to virtual asset regulation as we have it today for good reasons or understandable reasons. But when it comes to DeFi, for example, and there isn't an institution involved or there isn't an individual involved, that method falls apart. We're seeing the public sector around the world, in the international organizations and also domestic ones, really struggling with this idea. And to be very frank, industry is struggling with this idea too. Industry, the people who are developing these protocols that will one day be used by themselves, by other individuals, we don't know how to regulate this. And some of the suggestions of just kind of finding an individual and saying that person has control, I don't personally think is a particularly good solution or will work very well. So there are some really interesting things here around what are we trying to regulate, what does regulation actually mean? Is regulation even the right framework for talking about it? Regulation is the imposition of state control on the private sector. Maybe that's not the right way of going about things. Maybe it does need to be more collaborative. So I'll end there just repeating, we're incredibly excited by this. The Catalyst model seems like a good one. We hope it works out. More importantly, we hope it's a great discussion, but we hope it's a great project afterwards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. The next welcoming words will be from Javier Tamashiro, that is the CEO and co-founder of Osprey.
Thank you. I think there is one pointer. I have it. Great. Okay, so many ideas have been discussed so far. I think kind of the introduction was made when the discussion about when regulations come after the innovation or the technology itself, like ChatGPT. So I think there is a very interesting example that is a good way to start. If we think about Bitcoin, I think the first paper that everybody knows, it was published in 2008. So we are in 2023, and MiCA is a new regulation that probably most of us we are aware. It's a regulation that is being it was approved this year and is going to be enforced in the next 24 months. So what we see is a huge tension between the industry of all these entrepreneurs that have, over the last 15 years, building things on top of blockchain, super excited, building, developing on top of the idea of Bitcoins and all the benefits. And now regulations come, and there is a conflict, right? Because Bitcoin was not designed to comply with regulations that enforce things that look so much as the banking industry work, right? So essentially, just to give you an example, so when we make a transaction between Madrid to Singapore, your bank account will contain, your bank will send inside the transaction information of who is the sender, who is the recipient, the institution that is sending, the institution is receiving, and there will be a lot of validation happening in the backend that probably you are not aware. Now, if we change the environment and we make exactly the same transaction using Bitcoin, then we don't know who is sending, who is receiving. And this is creating a massive tension between what governments are expecting and connecting with one of the things that was discussed before. Because when we don't have an identity attached to a transaction, then we have problems with taxation, foreign policy. Eventually, transactions could go into a country that is in a sanction list. And eventually, we have problems with legal issues, like, for example, litigations. We work with a couple of companies that they have lawyers, that they have clients, that the couple invested in Bitcoins, they divorced, and the money flows outside. And then they need proof to, okay, who is the owner of the Bitcoins, right? So those are just 3 examples of how innovation comes first and then regulations come after, and then there is this tension, right? So my name is Javier Tamashiro. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Osprey. As you can imagine, we specialize in compliance. We are a Techstars company, and recently we got a tiny investment from Ripple. We started this company in Singapore, so our background is in traditional finance. I have a master's degree in engineering from Tokyo University. I was a visitor student at Imperial College London, and then I worked for a couple of financial institutions like Credit Suisse, Standard Chartered. And back in 2015, when I was working in traditional finance, I got involved in a couple of crypto projects, which, by the way, those projects did not succeed. And one of the main reasons was because they were not paying enough attention to compliance. And then that's what the moment when we make the click, and with my co-founders, we had a discussion, and we have this idea, okay, if this really take off, and we have a whole industry built on top of blockchain, then there will be a need for compliance solutions, right? It could go in too many directions, right? So there are so many exploration. We have DeFi, NFTs, CBDCs, cryptocurrencies. And by the way, I want to say that under asset digital assets, there are so many things, so many creatures, right? But what we know is that in order to scale this industry, we need compliance. So we are one of the pillars of the industry really to go to the moon that everybody is super excited is saying when Bitcoin goes up. So we need compliance. So what is essentially the problem that we are solving? Well, it was kind of discussed before. So in this transition between an unregulated space to a regulated space, we have all these companies that now they need to implement controls, policies, processes. They need people, they need skills, and they need software. And this is essentially what we do. We are a software company that provide solutions for the industry to operate with equivalent standard as the banking industry. We can discuss this later, but I don't want to go too detailed into the compliance pieces. But essentially, think about what happened when you open a bank account. So there is a process of collecting information of the user, validating your background. You need documentation, identity verification, background check. Your name is going to be screened again, blacklist, right? So all these things need to happen in a crypto environment. Then when there is a transfer between, again, Madrid and Singapore, then we need to send inside the transaction the identity of the sender and the recipient. It's called the travel rule, and it was approved together with MiCA. And blockchain analytics is essentially the capability of companies to detect before that transaction happened or during or after that the transaction is high risk. So then you can make an assessment of risk, eventually block the transaction, and make an investigation, make an escalation, and eventually report the authorities as happening in banking, right? As you can guess, and this is something also interesting to discuss, how much regulations in the crypto space need to look like regulations in the banking industry. Are we making too much copy-paste because we are lazy and we just understand this and now we are replicating the same? This is a very interesting topic. Well, so we have our version 2 live. So we are growing very fast, especially from companies from the European Union, From Singapore, we are moving part of the company to Europe. I'm based in Barcelona. We specialize in these 3 areas: travel rule, customer onboarding, and blockchain analytics. We have partners like, just to mention a few, CoinFirm, Blockchain Intelligence Group. We are implementing an integration with chain analysis. And essentially what we do is that these 3 processes that I explained before, they need to be interrelated, because essentially when you are making a payment between, let's say, Binance Madrid at Binance Singapore, the transaction will have to have information of the sender, the recipient, and all that information need to be validated, updated, accurate, complete. If that doesn't happen, then the travel rule is, at some point, the transaction is going to get blocked. When a transaction get blocked, then the number of false positives increase. In banking industry, false positives is a huge topic, because essentially make clients upset because a transaction, instead of taking 1 minute, it takes 2 days, because there is an investigation process to fix the transaction that happened to get blocked, and also increase the cost of compliance. So eventually, and this is a big message for the whole industry, if you don't start working on your travel rule solutions and processes, eventually you may not have a business, because you may not be able to trade, right? And this applies for companies in the European space, and also for companies in other jurisdictions. Like, for example, yesterday we had a webinar about the Spain market and Latin market. So one question that came up is, okay, so if I'm in Brazil, why do I need to care about MiCA and the travel rule? Because it's not applied yet here. Well, good, but probably your clients are making transactions with Kraken that is based in London or in Paris, that the European regulations apply. Well, so the expectation is that from Sao Paulo, when you initiate a payment, then the Kraken Europe is going to expect that you are able to provide information of who is sending, right? If you can't, then you cannot complete the payment. So in a way, the positive thing is that all these regulations are going to be like a catalyst of compliance. And always when it comes to discussion of compliance, people don't get super excited. I understand why. But there is a positive story, is that essentially if you are an entrepreneur, if you have funding, if you have clients, if you have good partners, you have good employees, then you can use compliance as a way of sending the signal that you are stable, you are scalable, you will have a business in 2 years. You're not gonna get shut down because you are illegal and you're in the shadow, right? So this is the positive part of compliance. Well, yeah, so as I said, so we are growing. We have a lot of programs, so companies that want to start testing our solution, they can do that. We have a lot of ideas about things that we can investigate. Just one idea that we are thinking now, and I leave it open, if we want to make a transaction from, let's say, Citibank to Binance, and assuming that the transaction can happen and the exchange rate is not an issue, then there is an information process that need to happen, right? So we have the SWIFT network in banking, and then we have the travel rule in crypto. Can we make like a channel, a bridge that connect these 2 things? I don't know, I'll leave it open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javier. The next guest that will have some welcoming words is Michael Fasanello, that is the head of Policy and Government Affairs for Unchained AI. Michael, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for having me. Michael Fasanello, head of Policy and Government Affairs for Unchained AI. Unchained AI is a Web3 security and risk management firm headquartered out of San Jose, California. We were founded on July 18th, 2018 in San Jose, California, and Chain is backed by Susquehanna Investment Group, Amino Capital, and some other Wall Street and Silicon Valley venture capital firms. Really happy to be here today to discuss regulation. We are co-founded by 2 very important people, Dr. Victor Fang and Ben Wu. Dr. Fang has over a decade of experience in the data science leadership roles at FireEye Mandiant, Awake Security, Greylock, Pivotal, and EMC. He holds more than 15 patents on AI and cybersecurity and fraud detection solutions. Mr. Wu is an award-winning enterprise big data artificial intelligence product veteran with over 2 decades of engineering executive experience at leading technology companies, Yahoo, Dell, EMC, and Pivotal. Next slide, please. We have 3 core competencies at Anchain AI: data analytics, threat intelligence, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think that one of the things that separates us from not only our competitors in the blockchain analytics and Web3 security risk management industry, but also puts us ahead of the cyber criminals in the realm also, is the artificial intelligence and machine learning aspect. It gives us an element of pattern recognition, predictability, and a speed of learning and a speed of revolution that enables us to enhance the curve of innovation in this field of data analytics and threat intelligence, which is really important in the crypto industry, as you know. Next slide, please. Our solutions and services are trusted by both private and public sector. We've got on the government side, the SEC, FinCEN in the United States, the IRS, both the civil division and their criminal division. On the private sector side, we've got everything from Salesforce, PwC, Deloitte, Gala Games, Peritone Capital, among many others. Next slide, please. So our product offering is bifurcated between products and services. We've got on the product side, we have CISO, which is our blockchain investigations platform that allows you to track, trace, and graph blockchain transactions across the chain itself. We've got BEI, which is a API that allows you to perform transaction monitoring in performance of anti-money laundering compliance regulations. We have Screen, which is a smart contract evaluation risk engine. And we have a new product out called Web3 SOC, which is essentially a security operations center for the digital asset space. On the services side, we have smart contract auditing, blockchain forensics and investigations. And I also run the training and certification side of the business as well. And this all contributes to our Web3 platform. Next slide. CISO is our next generation cryptocurrency forensics platform. It enables investigators and compliance teams to more quickly, easily, and intuitively identify bad actor wallets, conduct crypto forensics, and respond to AML regulatory inquiries. It's AI powered and machine learning powered compliance, and it allows you really to perform 8 times faster investigations. We also have a new feature of the product where instead of having to go through tutorials and learn how to actually use the software itself, we have a one-click auto trace feature where you can click on a button and it automatically maps all this stuff out for you. So for somebody like myself, who's not necessarily technologically inclined, I'm more of the legal regulatory compliance person. Instead of learning how to do all this stuff, you can click on a button and it maps everything out for you so you can have the blockchain investigation done automatically. Next slide, please. BEI, again, is our crypto compliance in 7 lines of code. It's a preventative crypto compliance solution that empowers you to take proactive actions to secure digital assets, quantify risk, and remain compliant with the regulatory requirements across the globe. BEI supports risk assessments across 20 blockchains, including NFT, decentralized finance, stablecoins, and more. Next slide, please. Screen is our battle-tested smart contract intelligence software as a service solution. It's powered by a patented sandbox, combining machine learning, static and dynamic analysis. It basically, in a nutshell, enables you to take protocol code and boil it down into plain language so you can see line by line what each piece of code is telling you, like what the code functions and calls are actually doing without necessarily being a back-end engineer. Next slide, please. And lastly, Web3 SOC, we found that 92% of all hacked smart contracts were in fact audited to begin with, which necessarily in the end failed. So we realized that we needed a more metric-driven systematic approach to identifying, protecting, and responding to threats once they happen. So we're developing basically a security operations center so that when threats come into the digital asset space, there should no longer be a zero-day effect where you don't have enough time to actually respond to a cybersecurity incident. Next slide, please. Anchain AI has won over 9 leading layer 1 blockchain grants. We've done everything from NFTs, DeFi, DAOs, payments, GameFi, identity. We've worked with Elrond, Ethereum, Solana, Polygon, also Ripple. Very, very happy to be here speaking with you guys today. So we're largely a part of all these different blockchains in the ecosystem, and it's great to secure the space as a whole. Next slide, please. I want to talk about the origins of the emerging threat landscape, because I think that sort of a pivotal reason why we're all here today to discuss regulation, sort of, the cart before the horse, if you would, is the reason behind all this regulation, which is the threat landscape itself. So pre-pandemic, everything was in person, everything was tangible. Post-pandemic, everything was virtual, right? Transition from tangible to digital assets and ownership. We found that the combined market cap of digital assets in the last few years had about 193% combined aggregate growth revenue. And the growth was fueled by the increased awareness and adoption of the blockchain technology space. Growth in mainstream adoption has also drawn, of course, with it a criminal element, and there's been a lot more victimization along with that. And then greed and gross negligence from traditional finance has also contributed to rampant losses in the digital asset space. Next slide, please. Centralized finance meets crypto. So as we know, for example, the FTX situation, a lot of people blame FTX on the crypto industry, when in reality, crypto was not the problem with FTX. It was the leadership and the lack of proper governance and oversight and controls behind the running of that company itself and the associated companies. And so I think if you look at a lot of the problems with the digital asset space, it's either lax regulations or piecemeal regulations. And it's really that the expectations of the digital asset space and the framework of regulation in the digital asset space is very nascent. So you've got traditional finance that's had decades and decades to perfect itself in terms of proper regulation and what fits that marketplace and industry. And then you have a very new emerging technology that's suddenly having to get used to all different use cases and different technologies. And it's struggling to catch up in a world where everything is demanded to be now. Next slide, please. So with centralized finance, coming from a banking compliance background, as we know, you go into a store, you swipe a credit card, you've got your point of sale origination, which with the merchant's payment network, that then has to go through the payment network banking partner. Then that has to go through the credit card network, and then the credit card network has to clear the charge and request payment from the originator's bank. So you've got 4 intermediaries there between the customer and the merchant. Next slide, please. Or in decentralized finance, you've got the originator funds their crypto wallet, and the originator sends the crypto to the beneficiary. The beneficiary receives the crypto and liquidates. 2 parties. So you've cut down on 50% of the intermediaries between those. And I think that the reduction of the intermediaries is both the beauty of this space, but also the challenge, because especially in a pseudonymous space like crypto, when you don't know who the parties are interacting between each other, unless you're dealing with a compliant exchange or something like that, it gives you a great challenge from a compliance standpoint. But also the reduction of those regulated intermediaries when you're dealing with, the former slide where you had 4 regulated entities, whether it's by the OCC in the United States or a bank regulator or something like that. You've got 4 times 4 layers at each stage of the game where illicit transactions or suspicious activity or things like that can be caught, or malicious activity or whatever you want to call it. Whereas in the decentralized space, you've just got point A to point B, and it's very difficult to catch things before they occur. So I think that's part of the challenge with our space as well. Thanks for advancing the slide. Appreciate that. We've also found 5 Web3 risk elements and FinCrime challenges: market volatility and devaluation of assets, commonly known as crypto winter, where hopefully at the tail end of about a 2.5-year crypto winter now. Also dealing with moral hazard and meltdowns of over-leveraged and under-regulated exchanges and funds, unclear regulatory and enforcement landscape, lack of uniform cybersecurity standards, and more. Looks like my time may be up, but I appreciate it.
All right. So first of all, I really want to thank you for the whole story. What I wanted to do was instead of having as long of a one-way discussion, I thought it would be better if we can interact with you. And so I think why don't we get the other panelists all together, and I think we can pick up where you're leaving off in terms of how Anchain is providing these security solutions, while we had, another venture that was just explaining how they're fixing the regulatory compliance kind of bridge. But there's other people on the panel too. So I think why don't we get everyone together?
Sure, yeah.
All right. Okay, so shall we? All right, so everyone who's a panelist, come on up. So let's see. And I don't know if we need, I think we kind of introduced everyone already. Louis, I think we didn't formally introduce you, but I mentioned in the beginning. And we have panelists we have a couple on screen too, right? So yeah, here we go. Okay, all right, so welcome everyone. Why don't I'm gonna, if you were all watching in the very beginning, you will have noticed that I mentioned everybody that's on the panel. But I don't mind if for Jillian and for Deepa, if you want to just say 30 seconds of 30 seconds or 1 minute of background or something, you're kind of just any perspective or how you're coming into this conversation. And I think, and Louis also, because you have not said anything so far, and then we can get into some discussion, all right? So Jillian, I'll just tell, since I know the order, Jillian, why don't you go ahead?
Great, well, thank you so much for having me. I've really loved hearing about the RegTech stuff. I'm coming from the background of being a finance professor who also teaches sustainability. I got really excited about the blockchain space because I thought it was bringing solutions to really hard to solve problems, like bringing people together in very separate markets. And I have written on the regulation side. I have also written recently on the taxation side because it's been very prominent in the US to think about how we're going to tax digital assets. And I'm excited to have this conversation. Thanks.
Law school and the business school at Berkeley, and has been working on this regulation topic, through the whole career. Deepa, why don't you say a few words now?
Firstly, thank you for having me, and it was great to hear all the people come in to this conversation already. It rings home true to a lot of conversations we've been having, both here within the Dubai ecosystem as well as with other global regulators, peer regulators, when it comes to thinking about regulating, but from a very progressive sort of mindset, right? Learning to, as regulators, it doesn't come naturally to us, but learning to say yes before we say no. And that's something I would love to talk about here in this conversation today. So thank you for having me.
And also, you were kind of indirectly mentioned earlier. VARA is probably a leading example of, a very progressive regulatory agent. It's not a regulatory agency per se, but just its ability to be, I'm going to say, an accelerator instead of the brakes on allowing all of kind of these new technologies to operate. So, I'll just say thank you for joining, and I think you're representing a very progressive kind of category in this space. And Louis, you want to just kind of introduce and say a few words?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I have been on different parts of the fence, and myself now I'm working partly for the World Bank as a regulator, and I've been working for the IMF as well. But I have also been on the banking industry and also been an entrepreneur. And one of the things that I feel from this kind of exercise, which brings a lot of value, is precisely the different and complex bankers that are needed for resolving a complex issue. You were mentioning about this is a cross-border element, and we need to somehow regulate. But this is also an element where we don't have a common definition of the assets we're regulating to start with. And we have a very important lack of data about what we're talking about. So we have so many question marks that I feel really that's maybe also a kicking off of some of the very important questions that we might need to be raising and probably helping to resolve in the coming years.
All right, fantastic. So we got just like a little bit of perspective from everyone. If I summarize it, what I would say is we've got perspective from the two ventures. One of them is basically saying, I'm going to just paraphrase for you guys. So one is basically saying you can really get stuck not thinking about how compliance with regulation works, and that there's software and there's tools that can help you. We've got one venture that is saying there's a whole bunch of ways to monitor the security issues, and blockchain apparently did not exactly make all security issues go away. A lot of the things that we're talking about are built on top of blockchain, and so if there's an underlying problem there, it affects everyone. And then of course we have kind of a research perspective, Ripple's perspective as a company in the business, Deepa's perspective as virtual regulatory authority. Okay, so I think my question, and I'm not sure who to initially direct it to, but kind of the starting point here is maybe what's working and not working. That's kind of we can ask that in everything. What's working and not working in cross-border? What's working and not working with digital ID? What's working and not? We can go through all those things and say kind of where we are. What we really want to get to is where could a researcher, where are you stuck with things? Where are we stuck as a venture? Where are we stuck as a regulator? Where are we stuck? And could another party say, oh, but we have part of that solution, because we're looking for the gaps, which no one of us could be solving ourselves. So feel free, I think, if anyone wants to take a shot at that, what do you think is working, and what do you think is this is just not working yet? Just raise your hand if you think you got it. Yeah, go ahead.
I can bring some stuff.
Great.
I'm starting from one point because it's something I'm dealing every day. So to me, one of the beauty of blockchain comes with the idea of decentralization and the fact that you can be a participant without opening a bank account, right? You don't need the middleman. That was the selling point all the time. And there is, with the regulations, there is like a process of centralized, going back to centralization, right? So we are replicating the idea of you need a license, and then you have KYC, you need all these accounts associated with a profile. So one of the things we observe is that, and it was a legal issue recently, the fact of self-hosted wallets making transactions to centralized entities. And let me translate this. I'm sure that those that they invested ever in crypto, you know what is a nano ledger. Essentially, it's like a digital wallet or a physical wallet, right? You buy your assets, and you can keep it at home. You don't need to put it in an exchange. Well, so there was a discussion at some point whether or not it should be allowed that you, from your nano ledger, you can send it to a centralized entity, right? Because you cannot prove ownership of the wallet.
Yeah, in a way, you were kind of bringing up a related issue when you were talking before, I think. And in fact, it's even parallel to the GDPR case where ChatGPT doesn't get regulated, it's impossible to regulate it, which is if all those rules were basically set up for institutions, like who is your originating institution and who is the other institution, there's just this mismatch between a decentralized world and the way it was all done before. And then you're adding to that conversation, and I think you're, in a way, I actually want to put a little bit more point on this, which is if the original kind of blockchain idea was that you're going to have freedom from all of those extra oversights and rules, and that, and there's going to be this huge efficiency gain in this new distributed technology. But then as we get into it, we're like, oh, but you have to apply all the old regulations, or a big chunk of them, in order to really make it work for the world. Then did you basically completely undermine the value that was originally started? Where are we going to end up here? If you have all those regulations, you still have to eventually comply to them, then you could almost argue that maybe there's no value. I'm being a little harsh here, but are we going to get to, well, if it's going to take, you can do the transaction in 30 seconds, but because of the regulatory rules, it still takes 2 days, and it still costs $100 to comply with all the regulations, or 100 euros or whatever. So why bother? Why? Okay, I want to hear everyone's reaction to that. And at some point, is there a solution? But what's your reaction? I'll take anyone's. You want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
I feel like you want to say something.
Well, I want to say lots of things. I think you're right. There is that risk, and that's, I think, largely from human nature, which is if you don't understand something, you try and make an analogy of something you do understand. I think for me, what this says is the solution needs to be one around much, but fundamentally better coordination between, not just between countries, not just between different regulators within countries and different sectors. That's a huge part of this we haven't touched on yet. And obviously between private sector and public sector, between the people inventing new technologies and the people regulating them. This is about education of policymakers, but also, again, of industry and tech people to understand what environment they're stepping into. There are a lot of examples of people in our space who have invented a great product, but one which doesn't, or service, or whatever it may be, but one which doesn't necessarily actually relate to the world as it exists. Now, you can argue that the world should change, sure, but it's not going to. So this kind of two-way transfer of information, education about what each side is trying to do and why, and then meeting a common ground is, I think, the solution to a lot of
Okay, so you think that you can actually get these two groups to find an intersecting. I mean, there's a set of people, and they're promoting two different approaches, you could say. The extreme on one case is hoping for a completely non-government, no banks, a very, extreme decentralized version. And there's another group of people who I think would probably like to see, not much change for, I'll say, the protection of all the people, or something in that category. But you think you can find an intersection, and that maybe the efficiency gains, you can find an intersection?
I think there has to be something there. I think that intersection cannot be people just talking to each other, because we're already doing that, and it doesn't seem to be working in a fundamental level. And this should also solve the problem of tech development coming and business model development coming faster than regulation can, right? If people are working together on the same topics but from different backgrounds. Now, this is the idea behind sandboxes, essentially.
Well, then let's have a Sandbox respond to that. So, Deepa, you're representing a regulator. You're kind of managing the Sandbox concept. You're managing an actual sandbox. Give us your perspective on, how strongly does it need to be regulated versus, and how much does it take away from the original benefit? And just how do you see all of this?
Are you able to hear me okay?
We can hear you. I think it doesn't hurt to either turn it up on this side or just closer to the microphone, maybe.
Great. I'm going to actually answer the question in two different ways. The comments that were raised by both the parties here in our communique, right? The first one I'll address is the point that was raised with regards to, is it a departure from the principle of what decentralized finance stood for, just because you put regulations in it? And I feel like there seems to be a commonality, I think even Iqbal, in your comment, that said, is it moving away from the fact that you're asking for it to be regulated, moves away from the core principles for which it was created. It therefore necessitates peers, it necessitates sort of intermediaries, and it necessitates time and cost, right? Does it have to be that? Number one. And I don't think we've got an answer to that, but it's possible to think about a utopian environment where that's not necessarily a derivative, right? Regulation doesn't come as a necessary evil in this setup, right? And two, and I'm actually going to draw back to Andrew's comment, I think, when he was speaking earlier, where he said, you've either got to make a choice between, let me look here, either a regulator tends to be protective in their approach, or there is an innovator that wants to be enabling in their approach. And the twain shall never meet. Well, that's not the case, right? It doesn't have to be the case. And so in my limited experience here as a regulator for virtual assets for the last year and a half, about 19 months or so, has really been that the markets last year, I would say, was not so willing to have a conversation with the regulator. This year has been a very, very different experience. I've personally had with a lot of the people at your end in the audience today that have wanted and sought regulation, more from the perspective of preservation, right? The fact that they are then scalable, they are deemed to be responsible, and they're able to do the right things, not just individually, but collectively, right? They're able to share costs, they're able to actually cut down on a lot of the time because they're able to share ideas and create an ecosystem that actually is fundamentally beneficial for wider society without each of them going off in a silo and having to do it by themselves, which takes an inordinately long amount of time and investment, as well as risk, of course, right? So when you're able to bring these parties and the industry wants to be self-regulated, by all means you should. And I don't think there's anything taking away from that. But how can we make this a collective enterprise? And that's, I think, the point you're heading towards, Iqbal. We talk about the sandbox, we call it a minimum viable product program, an MVP program. The reason we steer clear of calling it a sandbox is sandboxes often tend to be very limited in what it allows you to do. Right? And within a sandbox, it's also actually quite easy to be successful. So if you're starting to sell something to like 10 people at less than $100, chances are you're going to be fairly successful at it and fairly risk-free at it, right? It's when you start to operate at scale for the masses that the risks tend to occur, not because you want to hide the risks, you simply aren't aware of the risk, not as a regulator, I mean you as the industry. And as a consequence, it's up to the regulator to give you an environment where you can actually operate at scale. And you are able to operate at close to the point of crash to know where the point of crash is, in order for both you and us to collectively understand where is the point of failure that we start to build around. Have these kind of conversations to problem solve around. And I think that's just a fascinating part of the journey we're in. Not too many people get a chance to experience that.
All right, so so first I want to thank you for all of those. And I want to just pick out one thing that you're saying, which is that this year you're seeing more people actually want regulation maybe than before. And I think I can understand that because, you know, they want a long-term future for whatever they're doing. I think that's a really good point. I think if we're going to have success in our model here, we need to figure out where are the spaces that researchers could, you know, like everyone here has already seen, okay, this is the state of what you can do on security. And this is the software that can help you do some compliance. And here's a perspective of a regulator. But where is, where is the thing that you wish some research was happening that could actually fill a gap? And, you know, I can say you could address what we're talking about. You know, you could address, well, you know, digital ID. You could address the non-financial use case. You could say, oh, cross-border is the place. But I'd like to hear that, you know, because I'm kind of like searching for it right now. So maybe I'll come. All right, Jillian, go ahead. I feel like you've got a suggestion here.
Sure. So I wanted to point out some of the points that haven't sort of come up so far, and things I'm thinking about are bottlenecks. So where are the bottlenecks in this space? And we would have went to, say, the broker dealers or somebody who's doing a lot. But in a decentralized exchange, that's not really the point, rather the points where it's the processing of information, or if we're on a layer one, it's the fact that, hey, we need to scale up to be able to do it faster. And so we're having a lot of these roll-ups that themselves may introduce now security potential for breaches, or if we're going between chains, it's really the bridges that might be these problems. And so I think it's actually changing where we look to. And it's also asking questions like, in a traditional securities market, maybe we have circuit breakers. Well, we don't have something for DeFi, for smart contracts, that necessarily is a kill switch, right? And so thinking about how we can maybe have a tech solution, because I love that we've had RegTech here. How can we have a RegTech solution that brings sort of exactly what you traditionally want to do, which is slow down the brakes on something, into these markets? I think that's one really place I'd love to see. I think the other place that I'd love to see is to think about how, if we are going to be doing this, we're bringing in old people and young people and vulnerable populations. One thing you've asked about is this regulation, but there's also going to be spillover effects to other markets. And the places where I get excited is understanding that, hey, adopting a cryptocurrency in some communities, because there is such violence there and there's such unstable governments, it allows a chance for the diaspora to get money. It also means that because you don't have physical cash, that there is no longer a threat of violence against you, because they can't actually steal your digital wallet or things like that. And so I think thinking through some of these extra channels would be really helpful as we build out this space to understand, externalities of regulation elsewhere.
Okay, so those are two great proposals. Both, I'm going to just call your first one the kill switch, and the second one, although I get that you could also just slow things down, and the second one, where are the places that are very natural? Let's do a little validation with everybody here. What do you think of those two suggestions? Are there things that you could help with that already you're doing? And where can the venture be complementary? Where can the regulator be complementary? That's the whole goal here. So we can just go down the line. You got thoughts on that? Kill switch or the emerging community that could really use it?
Yes, I mean, on the kill switch point, I just think the term will terrify anyone who works in the DeFi space. I absolutely understand your what you mean in terms of having these sort of breakers and things, which makes a lot of sense from a systemic point of view. But when you have, again, going back to the idea of who's the institution or who's the individual acting here, we need people to accept they're part of a wider financial system or DeFi system that will get a sort of public good out of this kind of thing, rather than just seeing the threat to their individual liberty or ability to transact or something. So, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a very important point, but it needs to be treated very carefully, I think.
All right, so we got to be careful with the kill switch. All right, I got that one. Do you want?
Yeah, so maybe without going into the detail of that suggestion, but it's something that we really believe is the importance of creating this connection with traditional finance, because there is a huge discussion about that. Like at the beginning was the crypto space is going to take over the banking industry, and then the opposite view. I think that's not the right thing. The problem, I think we need both, and our focus should be how each other can complement, right?
Right. That's back to the finding the intersecting ground
right.
Model. Okay. Lewis, thoughts?
Yeah, I think this intersection is a very important aspect, and I think there's no sufficient evidence, and data are very limited to really get to conclusions. So I think it's an area where deepening research would definitely help. Also, on one of the main concerns of the regulator, which is financial stability. Financial stability is one of the main areas a regulator is thinking about when regulating, and the fact that there is a lack of knowledge of the connection between the real economy and the crypto economy is a very clear lab that actually could be covered by research. The problem with that is the lack of data involved in that. So, and adding a little bit on that, I think regulation is not a binary element where either it's good or it's bad. We really need regulation. And this claim that I completely agree more and more There's a demand for regulation, not just from the regulator, of course, but also from institutions wanting to have a clear way to foot their ground on a solid regulation. Is something that probably trying to cover some of the gaps that the regulator might have could be another space where a contribution from outside of the regulator could be a good idea. So whatever the industry is more capable of putting forward to the regulator is something that is an area that probably is a good gap to close.
Okay, so we got a couple themes starting to emerge. I just keep repeating them. So we've got how you can put friction or slow down or man-in-the-middle ideas. We didn't really talk that much about the new communities, but maybe we'll come back to that. This re-emerging theme, how do you cross-educate? How do you get, that you can't do no regulation and you can't just, over-regulate. So how do you really find the middle ground? I think we've had multiple support, topics there. I'm going to go to both Michael and Deepa, and then you added stability. Okay, and then we had, do the banks take over crypto or do crypto take over the bank? That was all still finding the intersection. We had the stability idea, in here. As I think that you're saying maybe that's a research problem, but could be aided by what ventures or what other people are doing. So Michael, you want to add to that? And then I'll go to you, Deepa, for either you got new topics or, what you're already doing that researchers could grab onto and say, oh, well, if we did something in parallel, it could help. Michael?
I'm sort of trying to figure out where I want to pick up here. There's been a lot of good stuff discussed, but I think that one of the troubles with regulating this industry is not so much that you're looking at government regulation on one side and industry on the other side. And then you've got two parts of industry. You've got industry that wants regulation and you've got industry that doesn't want regulation. But you've also got people outside of industry itself, the people that are actually using the technology, the purists, if you would, that the ones that are followers of Satoshi and things like that, that they'll never comply. They'll always be able to use, because the nature of DeFi itself is it really can't be regulated. I mean, you can regulate the compliant choke points, you can regulate the touch points with the traditional finance system, but DeFi itself, you can't kill Bitcoin, you can't kill Ethereum, things like that. So you'll always have an element of this technology that will operate in and of itself unless you're shutting down the internet or a power outage, something like that. So, you've really got three buckets here. You've got the buckets of the purists who can operate alone with, themselves, P2P. And then you've got criminals also that will do that. Then you've got industry and compliant professionals. And then you've also got government. And I think the industry and government will be able to, at some point, come to some agreement in and of themselves. But I think that there will always be, in the digital asset space, a quasi-regulated or a regulated system that operates in parallel with the traditional finance system. And then you'll have this very purist pool that sort of always does this P2P transaction where you're not going to liquidate to a fiat currency. You're just going to use crypto to crypto as your means of payment or as your means of value transaction.
Okay, all right. So I got your point. And so I can either just kind of agree with that and say all right, fine. There's going to be a segment of people that are just going to use the technology directly, and I'm okay with that. I'm sure there's people who make wine at home too or something. But the there's a lot of kind of willing to look the other way and things like that. But the truth is, no matter what technology can do, government is really on top of it. I'm a technologist. I'm not the first person to think that way. But as soon as government makes something illegal, it doesn't really matter if the technology can do it. You can say all right, well, you know what? It's illegal to turn on your computer. If you really did that, it doesn't matter what the computer can do. You're just going to go to jail when you turn on your computer. So I'm not saying that's a policy anybody wants. I'm just saying we can't just think that regulations are incapable of affecting anything just because the technology can do it. And for that, now I'm going to go to the regulatory side. Hopefully you're not going to make everything we do illegal. But go ahead, Deepa. What's your point of view? But we don't have your audio for some reason. No audio. Is that on our side?
Is that right?
Okay. Yep, it's back.
Sure. So I think the topic has been belabored a little bit around the table, so I don't want to bring up the points that have already been covered, but I do want to give an example of how we've thought of doing some of the regulatory oversight at our end. I'm not claiming that we've got it right, but it's just a different approach. From a regulator that clearly understands that we are never going to be able to keep pace with the level of thinking, innovation, and progressiveness of the industry, right? If you try and over-regulate anything or regulate it before the party's actually done anything about it, then you've killed the industry before it began, or you've killed innovation completely, neither of which is the agenda here, right? And I do think that there is something to be said about the industry is always going to be able to teach you a little bit more about what they actually need and what the market needs for you to be able to protect against, right? To this end, one of the things that we do is, our VASPs, the ones that are licensed within our ecosystem, are of course expected to report back to the regulator after having conducted, their monthly reviews, et cetera, right? So the things that you would expect to see in any other traditional finance setup, including in the UAE, and of course globally across any other jurisdiction as well, right? You'll report back to the regulator on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. And that determines then whether you have been compliant or non-compliant with the rules. What we actually also do on top of it is create a layer 2 on top of the likes, I think, Anchain up here is one of the kinds of parties you would think about, but you could also have the chain analysis, Elliptics, Terra, etc. So there are lots of different players that the VASPs currently use to manage their own transaction flows and compliance. Which deal largely with VASP, but in a lot of cases also give intelligence to regulators. We do neither. We aren't seeking intelligence from them, but what we are doing is creating a layer on top of it in order for us to be able to observe the behaviors across all of these chains, all of these analytical tools ourselves. So this is largely dealing with the point you raised on cross-border and the risks that we as a regulator may choose to undertake because it's our risk appetite for our market, but another regulator may not. And it is a borderless economy. So once we've allowed you to start to operate here, the risk is going to permeate to your ecosystem anyway, right? And how do we therefore ensure that we are not inadvertently sort of spoiling your ecosystem or your sort of risk profile as a consequence of our own comfort level with it, right? And so we are looking at it as a layer of tech and then observing the VASP to see, does the VASP actually come up and tell us, look, these are the 10 reasons. I mean, we firstly, sorry, let me take a step back. We also set a threshold of tolerance, right? So we say our red, amber, green risk profile is at XYZ percentage. So it doesn't really depend on what you consider is favorable for your tolerance threshold, right? It's depending on our ecosystem and our threshold. And as a consequence, when a VASP VC comes and tells us, look, we messed up, this was all red in quarter one, but over week one, and this is how we're going to kind of fix it over the next 2 or 3 weeks, you can progressively see that go from red to green. We're comfortable with that, right? We aren't trying to shut you down day one. And I think that's just something to think about.
Yeah, and let me kind of try to cut you off a little bit, but I like the one strong point there, which is not every regulator is the same, and there's a whole wide risk tolerance between some versus others, and then you've got your model for figuring out. I want to actually switch it to the audience conversation. Honestly, it's taken a little time to try to figure out where the intersections are, but what we're really interested in is, does anyone have almost like a research direction and you want to test it with, with this group and kind of hear where the synergies might be? But short of that, any question would be fine. Let's see what you guys are thinking. You didn't know there would be a quiz during, yeah, right. You thought you can just absorb, but no. Yeah, oh, there's questions online. Okay, great, yep. Global audience counts.
So the question via Zoom is for Andrew. Andrew mentioned Vara and their work, and he says, how far are we away from agreed global principles, e.g. WCAG for accessibility?
How far are we away from, I guess, common global principles? And then there were
agreed
some examples, I guess. I didn't catch the letters.
Yeah, you know, the international organizations are working on it, working hard, and I mean, Deepa will be much better qualified to speak to this than I am. You know, the different international bodies, so the FSB, Financial Stability Board, IOSCO, Securities International Organization, the Bank for International Settlement, each one is looking at these topics from their own point of view. I think and they're going, to be honest, they're going quite quickly for the way these things work. For me, the issue is coordination between them and between them what happens domestically, because to a conversation we've been having a lot recently on the stage, like, not even amongst themselves are they necessarily agreeing on definitions of certain core terms here. And again, from where any individual institution sits, that might make sense. But then when you sort of zoom out and you look at it and you think, well, hang on, the financial regulators globally can't agree on definitions, let alone if you bring in data regulators or other types of regulator, let alone how that then gets downloaded into
So it sounds like
rules.
you're still pretty far.
They're working quickly.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, okay. And I'm going to just interject questions in between. I want your response. Digital ID, is it necessary for regulation to work? Are you going to need it? Deepa is nodding her head, so that's a yes. What do you guys think? Is there a version of digital asset is there a version of digital assets where it really can be without a digital ID, where it can, or without an ID connected to the transaction?
You mean identity?
Without identity. Jillian also has a comment. Go ahead if you have one.
No, I think the European Union is working on that, right? It's not clear whether or not it's going to be on top of blockchain, but I think it could potentially drop a lot the cost of compliance, because you may not need to replicate the KYC process again and again so many times. Still, the institution will own compliance, but you know, everybody is not very happy to complete the form every time you open a bank account.
Yeah, okay, got it. So. Jillian, you can add to that if you like.
Yes, I would like to bring up now just the point of AI and that it could create deep fakes. And so we definitely need a digital ID, but where maybe a solution is, and I put this out to people in the audience, is perhaps thinking about what we do already. We have a lot of social networks that we use to verify trust. And I know a lot of the techniques so far have been going biometrics or going the other direction. I really do think that there's a solution, given all the data with blockchain, that you might be able to get it through the social identification. And I think that is a potentially fruitful channel, because I don't think everybody actually wants to give up their biometric information or other things because of privacy reasons.
Okay, so there might be some shortcuts to it. Go ahead.
And one very related aspect is all the efforts on digital IDs so far are national, mostly. And probably there are a few other examples where we're talking about a global identity use case. And that is a very interesting angle. And maybe we're finding also interesting projects like WorldCoin, looking at that from a private sector perspective, not from an infrastructure Aadhaar style in India, national infrastructure for digital identity that probably might also be in the end working as a verified digital identity for transactions. And that's really a challenge to merge national identity systems with the very first use case for global identity.
Yeah, or at least country agnostic, right? Even if you don't have everybody. I think that's another emerging research theme here. I'll come to you in a second. I think that's an interesting idea, which is just like if I can say this for a second, that kind of the future of like logging into Google or logging into Facebook or all these things is going farther and farther towards no password. And it's either biometric or it's so many other signals that they have that they really know it's you, and like you may not even need to like do anything more than just click the button and you're in because of which machine you're using and all kinds of other information they have. So if you actually tied, I'm saying there could be like a very solid research, technology research category where I think, building on what Jillian's saying, that you could actually build that map of most known people in the world and figure out kind of who they are and put them into some sort of directory. I don't know, like there may be something about how you solve identity without kind of forcing it. Anyway, I'll stop there before I come up with something strange. Okay, go ahead. We have a question in the audience.
Yeah, as we know, right now, U.S. is regulate cryptocurrency by SEC. It's more like treat cryptocurrency as a security. But today we are talking more about EU or Singapore's regulation. Is more about the identity to record the transaction, the KYC, all the things. But we should know that U.S. is really the frontier of the cryptocurrency, all the things, blockchain. So do you guys think there's a tendency for other countries also to regulate cryptocurrency as securities? And do you think cryptocurrency really has the nature of securities?
Okay,
I
that's
guess
a
I'll
hot
take that
one
one.
for
Yeah.
you. Yeah, right.
Look, I think, well, for what it's worth, no, I don't think there's a tendency or a prospect that other countries will follow the United States in the way that certain agencies there are attempting to define securities. I think you have, however, highlighted really the key thing here, which is a bit of an elephant in the room. The crypto industry, by and large, as we know it, has come from the United States. There is no regulation, no clear regulation in the United States, and there is in other jurisdictions. Just to really pick up on what everyone was saying, regulation is fundamental, is very good. Ripple as a company, I as a person, am deeply pro-regulation. Regulation is what provides the framework for conducting activities. Without it, we cannot do our business, and the clearer the regulation, the better. So the United States approach, to me, seems deeply flawed, even from a public policy point of view. I find it hard to understand, being a European who works in the sector, if a jurisdiction is uncomfortable with something, then you regulate it. You don't not regulate it. So I find it difficult to understand that approach. But no, to your question, I don't think there's any prospect of the rest of the world kind of following in the same direction.
Okay, I'm going to switch to speed round here. Okay, we got, I'm going to say 5 minutes. We'll take questions. Let's do short answers. Okay, go ahead. What was your question going to be? Yeah.
Thank you very much. It builds on the previous question as well. It feels to me like the regulation is kind of trying to fit a very innovative sector like crypto and blockchain in general used to be into categories that were pre-established in the traditional financial world. So my question would be, what can the companies like yours do to help the regulators not strangle innovation by trying to force the existing blockchain technologies into pre-existing, traditional finance categories? How can you keep innovation alive?
Your question is for the ventures.
Well, it's an open question, either for Andrew or
it's
for
an open.
Andrew as well,
It's an open question. All right. Anyone want to address? Okay, Louis.
Just very quickly, I don't think all regulators are trying to just assimilate crypto to traditional assets. That is one approach, and that has been the SEC and some other regulators in the US approach. And that might be the easy first reaction to try not to change regulation. I think when there is no new regulation, we're seeing that with MiCA regulation, for instance, in Europe, there's also a much more deep analysis of what kind of assets or kind of activities are involved in crypto. So I think that's not the only way, I would say. That's my only point.
Okay, I think, Deepa, we're going to give you only 30 seconds on this.
I'm going to just second the point, right? In the UAE, as you can see, a specialist regulator was set up which is VARA, right? It was set up specifically to be different from the Securities Authority and the Financial Services Authority, almost to sit at the intersection of finance and tech. That's what VARA is. So just completely concur.
You're progressive on the RICS. The question, I think, somewhere, and maybe we have to leave that one now, but I think the question is there something that people could be doing to help make it work for the regulators? Yeah.
I personally believe that we need to work to understand the incentives in the industry. So we have governments, we have companies, we have users.
Yeah.
And one thing that always come up when we talk to VCs and banks is this idea that the Web3 or the crypto space is still very niche. It's still, I mean, it's growing. When we see it looks big, but it's in the context of the whole pie is still very small. So we can have this kind of technical discussion about, so you can do really fancy stuff from a technical point of view, and they work and could be regulated, could be unregulated. But at the end of the day, what we want is to bring the money from traditional finance into this space. We want BlackRock into Web3 or crypto. We want Citibank. We want Credit Suisse. I mean, we want all these wealthy people to trust this space and put the money, and then we will be talking about something big, right? Otherwise, we are just a couple of kids discussing, let's do this at the garage, right? And for that, we need clear rules. Right. You don't get into the game if you don't understand the rules, right?
Right. Clear. I mean, clear. That's the whole point of this whole thing is actually that right now, the only thing really limiting it is the regulatory factors, because the other things can really be worked out. I think we can take one more question. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. That was super insightful to me. My question is more about there's been some mention of like there's a people who don't want regulation. Some people want regulation, but like if you take crypto and the motivation behind the history motivation behind, it's more decentralized. And if you bring regulation, it's kind of conflicting, right? To that, because regulators needs to be someone centralized. Someone needs to check and say, this is good, this is bad. So how do you see that to be resolved, where the industry wants to be decentralized? That's kind of the original motivation behind the crypto. And instead of not making crypto to be like a banking system now.
I don't know if someone wants to say something. I feel like we talked about this a little bit, I'm not sure. I don't know. I think there's there seems to be a trend where companies are not really pulling away from regulators now. It seems that they know that if they work with regulators, they're going to go a lot farther than. And to tell you the truth, I think some of this is just watching Facebook or watching. People in the last set of technologies, do things kind of keeping governments a little farther away and then getting backlash later on. Obviously, that's just like a guess or whatever. But I think people in this space don't really think that way anymore. If anyone wants to argue that point, feel free.
Don't argue. I think one thing I'd say is people who come from a financial background are much more comfortable being regulated than people coming from a tech background, just because it's happened so much longer. So
okay, and it's happened on the other side as well. Okay, I want to just hear cross-border. Is there research to be done there? Non-financial use cases. Is there a research project there? What could it be? We're after. What are the open questions? Your thoughts.
Well, cross-border is massive.
Jillian's got one. Jillian, what's your thought?
I would really like somebody to do more on this recent movement on exit to community and thinking about co-ops and different spaces where we can have an organizational model that could perhaps be the insurance industry or energy industry. Maine is just putting a thing forward to basically decentralize its energy consumption. I think that thinking if we can take the decentralized model to traditional businesses is what I would love to see.
All right, and I can't end it without just taking your input on this one thing then. What about all the non-financial cases? Do we need a different regulatory framework? Can it fit in into the same one. What's going to happen with if you want to do voting with blockchain? Like, are you still going to have to do KYC before you do it? What will happen there? What needs to happen? Is there a research project? What would happen? Don't everyone speak at once.
I'm going to take this one, just a comment on it in terms of the entertainment industry, and this is one that VAR is experimenting with in our setup. The entertainment industry and content creation doesn't necessarily have directly to do with value exchange in terms of financial gain, right? But how can we actually make that a more secure, yet equally progressive, yet decentralized environment, and is there a use case for that? We're testing it. Any contributors to that exercise are more than welcome to participate.
Okay, so I won't guess the research, but I feel like there's something there. All right, we're gonna stop it here. First of all, I wanna thank all of you guys for really an extraordinary effort to come together in one time slot and talk about this together. Also to try the kind of first version of this model where we're trying to understand each other, and we're all, it's not like 6 researchers talking or 6 regulators talking, or, it's not that. And so we're finding, where are these common ground, where are the gaps, all these things. So thank you for participating. I want to thank everyone in the audience for your perspective, your interest. After this, we are going to open a call for research. Basically, we're going to open it so that globally anyone can apply. And what we're going to be looking for is, in that conversation, or what I understand the gap between here and there is, this research would actually make a difference. It would further this, the entire progress of the world in this direction. And so hopefully your work today enlightens what all those proposals will be, and we're gonna learn from that whole process and continue to make it better. So thank you for participating. Thank all of you for coming and contributing. Just thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for, I will add a few words to what just said Iklak. Thank you for everybody to participate to that event. We learned a lot of things today. We have some questions that were not answered, but this is the result of this kind of event, this Collider event. So I will ask a family picture for everybody to commemorate this event, and then I will ask everybody to come to have the big picture, as I was asked. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.